Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started. Okay, welcome back. Today I am here with Dr. Kuba and excited to talk about a subject matter. It was funny. I was thinking about what we were going to discuss today, and literally about an hour before you arrived, you texted me about this particular subject matter, which is kind of a big category of an associate. And you've had associates for a while. I have had several practice owners over the last few weeks that are actually considering an associate for the first time. I think just due to the stress of owning a practice now, they're ready to share some of that load and have the freedom to step away from their practice. And so they're wondering, should I bring on an associate? And I feel like this is an area that you've walked through really on numerous different occasions, and associates have been a part of your history for quite some time. So I wanted to be able to kind of talk with you about this. I do feel like there's kind of three categories that I want to make sure we hit, which is the emotional decision to bring on an associate, like what emotionally should prompt that, even that thought process. And then I think financially, when is a practice ready? And we can talk through some things on that. And then I would say the last component is once you have kind of thought about, yes, I'm ready for an associate, then how do you go about finding one? So I want to try to hit those three categories. But first, will you tell us a little bit about how long, because you were on your own for, I don't know how many years, and then what led you to bring on an associate?
So I feel like as you've gone through and very clearly delineated those three things, my thought sitting here is I am so far out in left field in the way I approached it. So I don't know how useful my experiences are going to be to the person who's strategizing, because mine was not strategic whatsoever. And so as I'm talking here, you may want to redirect for the audience, like, okay, don't do that. But this is where this part of it is helpful, because I wish I was smart enough to have gone through it that way. The first one you said was emotional, and that was 1,000% what drove my boat to the associate. So I guess in thinking about, like, could I financially afford it? Was I burnt out at that point? No. Or if I was, I hadn't realized that I was. And so I just, these thoughts were not, it was not a strategic decision whatsoever. I will say, when you ask how long I've had an associate, so the main associate I've had has been there for 6 years. But kind of. And so what does that mean? Well, I met one of them. She covered for me when I was on maternity leave 10 years ago. Mm. And so is she considered an associate? I don't know. And that too, 10 years ago, it was like she was there one day a week because we had just started the practice, less than maybe a year before from scratch. So we were very slow. So she was there like one day a week, and it was not that robust. So I don't know how I count that. So anyway, fast forward to, let's go with the main 6-year associate. He was a dental student, and I was a part-time, like very, very part-time in the pedo department. And so I guess I had taught him as a dental student. I don't remember it. He does. And then when he was a resident, that's where he kind of caught my eye because multiple reasons. But anyway, the big reason was he was on anesthesia rotation that day. So when you're a pedo resident, you rotate through to watch how the anesthesiologist, to learn your airway management and all of that stuff. So he was on anesthesia rotation, and I happened to be in the OR with a full day of cases. So what the anesthesia observer does, they just hop rooms and watch the anesthesiologist get the case started, end the case. And so he ended up being in my room for a good portion of the day. And so he was kind of getting a double dose of, because as a resident at that point, you're following whatever. So it could be a ENT's case you're watching, and it could be a GI case, and it could be anything. So it's not dental specific. But for him that day, he got a double where he was getting the intubation part of it and the airway management and all of that. And then he was also getting my thoughts on, why am I treating this patient in the OR? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? What are the alternatives? What are the medicaments? Like all of that. So he was getting like a 2-for-1 kind of thing. Anyway, so I think for both of us at the end of that day, I was like, I really liked that guy. And so what did I like about him? I liked his confidence without arrogance. I liked that he could banter with the anesthesiologist. Like, I'm such a introvert and all that. Like, I don't banter with anesthesiologists unless I have known them for a very long time up there and have done many cases with them. So the fact that this resident just had this cool, composed, able to banter, knew when to banter and when not to. Like, I think that's a skill, that's some people have it and some don't, where a lot of people just don't know when is appropriate to start talking and how much to talk and all of that. And he seemed to like own that, which I thought was very remarkable for a young man, and then he asked a lot of really good questions as far as what I was doing in the case and why not. And then a lot of times I'll bring them over. I'm like, okay, look over my shoulder. Look at these x-rays. What are you treatment planning? Why are you treatment planning that? Why not this? Why that? The parent's asking this. So I was like kind of giving him a little pop quiz on the spot. And I really just liked everything he had to say. It seemed very sharp. So anyway, at the end of the day, like, he left. He was done with his rotation, had to get back to class or whatever it was. And even my assistant, who at that time, she didn't like anybody, she was always like, people. So we got along very well. We were like, we don't like people. And she was like, oh, where did he go? I'm like, oh. So even the assistant, who likes nobody, found this guy to not be irritating as anything, because she found everybody to be irritating. So I just thought about it and went, could I see him helping in the practice? So I don't know, I guess maybe that was 6 years ago. Maybe I was starting to get to the point of, because at that point I would have had the practice for about 4 years. Mm-hmm. So maybe I was kind of getting to the point of like, it would be nice to, if I'm going to CE, to have coverage, or it would be nice to have like, so I don't really remember, but I must have, because at that point then I was like, I could see this guy like really getting along with my patients, which at that point I had never met anybody who had, that I would have said the same for, because I've got a very, we're in a very competitive area. There's so many general dentists. There's probably like 100 general dentists in a 5-mile radius. And so for a patient to come pick us, and if you ever see my office, you will not drive by and see us. You've got to know we're there. We're a terrible location. Which I picked by design, which again, that's my weird quirks, right? So it's not that I didn't know location. I knew it and I chose to go with this location, and I don't regret it for a second. But it just took longer to build up. Anyway, I think if you're a patient of ours, you really have kind of got to want to be a patient of ours, because we're hard to find, and like, our hours are not great. We're not open on weekends. We're not open late in the evening. So you want to be a patient. You're kind of making a lot of sacrifices to come be a patient. And a lot of that is because of the demographic. They want to see a female. They want to see an Indian female. So, and this associate is not. And so, he's a Caucasian male. And so, but for me to go, I think he's got the right personality, or able to really, I could see him, for lack of a better word, kind of charming the parents. Like, I think he could get along with them. I think he would find their, nuances workable, where there's a lot of personalities that I just don't think would get along with my patients very well. So anyway, at the end of that day, I just sent him an email. I said, hey, I've never had an associate. I don't even know if I can afford an associate, but I really enjoyed this day with you. So if, and there's not a lot of people I could see stepping in and getting along with my team and my patients and my philosophies. And I think I kind of got an idea of his philosophies because I was talking with him throughout the day. Right, yeah. And pop quizzing him, if you will. And so I just said, I'm just throwing this out there. If you are ever interested in like picking up a day, I'm just being very transparent. I've never had an associate. So if you want to experiment this, just let me know. And he replied back and was like, no, I thoroughly enjoyed my day too. And it was really nice to see kind of the way you think about things and the way you do things, because I've observed in these other rooms with these other dentists. And, your philosophies I could see like me matching up with, which of course I don't know. Like, it's not like I talk with other dentists about what are your philosophies. Like, we're not going to sit there and like grill each other
Compare
on
notes.
Yeah, what you do with this treatment plan, right? So it was like, okay, so people do things differently, and for whatever reason, we seemed like we could balance each other well. So I think at that point, this might have been, I don't know, in the spring of that year. So he kind of circled back to me a month or two later and was like, okay, I'd really like to pick up a day with you. I'm going to pick up 4 days with this other colleague of ours who's not corporate, but kind of more or less like had multiple offices. And he's like, so I can get that, but then I do want like one true, like a private PPO practice type experience, which I thought was very smart,
right,
for him. To be thinking that way. So that's how it started that first year. He joined us 1 day a week for that year. And I want to say, I don't remember. Maybe it was the two of us together there when he was there. Day. Yeah.
Okay.
I bet that's how it was for at least that first year, where he could learn from me in terms of what I did in my practice, and then I could watch and see what he was doing and make sure that people were getting along as I was hoping they would.
Yeah, which is a strategy that you've maintained, because your newest associate, one of the things that we talked about when he started was, let's make sure that he has at least several days initially alongside you. Even though there are other associates there that he could work alongside, we wanted to make sure that he had time with you so that he's able to watch you, you're able to watch him, y'all are able to kind of dialogue in between patients. And so I would imagine that's probably the strategy you had with your first associate, is kind of that, let's go tandem, and then we can kind of break apart and do our own thing.
So then to hit the question you said about can you afford it? Mm-hmm. I almost, now looking back at it, almost liken it to like when you're debating going, should I hire my hygienist or should I build another room? Usually if you're thinking that, the answer is yes. Mm-hmm. Like you will fill it.
Yeah.
And like you don't even realize how much more you could do. And so I that's how I think. Now, mm-hmm. You're clearly the expert on that, but to me, there's never a day that I felt like we lost money having the associate there. Exactly. Ever. And I don't think there is a day that he's going, man, it's too bad I showed up on this day and I got zero production. I don't think it was that. I don't think it's ever been like that. Certainly there's good days and bad days, but it's, I think it was advantageous to both of us. Yes. From that perspective.
Yeah.
I can't, there was never a feeling that I remember going, oh, that was a dumb decision on my part.
Yeah, financially speaking. Well, and to your point earlier, you may not have necessarily thought through all three layers of, do I want this person? Can I afford this person? How am I going to, organize the arrangement with this person? However, I think that point that you made is, even though you weren't strategic in it still financially benefited your practice. And I wouldn't say that that's 100% of the time, but that's pretty common, that once an associate is brought on, as long as the staff is continuing to try to grow the practice, that the practice does become financially more successful because there's another provider in the office. And so several of the clients that I've worked with are so fearful of the financial impact, which is understandable, that sometimes that leap of faith forward is kind of pushed down the road because they just can't see how it will be financially beneficial for them. So I do think, your so-called lack of strategy in the whole process may have benefited you, because you didn't weigh yourself down getting all worried about the finances. You just moved forward, found somebody that you knew could work with your practice, and it turned into a great 6-year relationship that benefited both of you guys.
Right. So, I do remember thinking, can I afford this? But I tend to not look at the numbers, so I was like, I don't know, but I just really enjoyed working alongside him and was hoping to have some freedom. Mm-hmm. I think, now that I think about that, probably was it, me going, man, this would be nice to have a day to go spend with my kids or to go do something, and at least know that the practice was covered. So I guess that's where, again, people need to look at and go, for me, it's like, okay, well, that means I might be taking home less, but I'd rather sacrifice that to have the day with my kids because I've got a husband that does work. So I'm not the only breadwinner. So I don't know if that kind of impacts what everybody else is able to do or not. But if you are going, yeah, I'm going to take a hit for a couple of months in my own pay, and you can afford to do that, man, it just like, there's not been a time where I've gone, darned, I wish I hadn't done that.
Exactly.
At all. Like,
Yeah.
it's just been nothing but I still made as much money as I needed to, and I still got some time off. And then the camaraderie, oh my gosh, like, I hate being in the office by myself now. I hate it.
Yeah.
To where, like, I've wanted to drop many insurances, and you have been the one to say, but Kuba, if you drop and then y'all shrink down, then you're not going to be able to afford the associate anymore.
Right.
And so now I'm still there doing it because I don't want to work by myself. I don't like it. I had to do it last Thursday. I was like, this sucks. Because there's just,
There's
like,
something fun about having a counterpart that is thinking like you're thinking and having the same experience that you're having. A hygienist can't relate in the same way. An assistant can't relate in the same way. Front office certainly can't relate in the same way. So it's nice to have somebody that can kind of banter with you throughout the day. And I do think that's one of those side benefits that a lot of practice owners don't think about. And it is fun. It's a relief to have somebody there that kind of understands what you're going through.
when even my, so the same associate's been on paternity leave for, it feels like forever. And so I messaged him the other day and I was like, dude, I miss you. Even though, like, there's been a handful of days that I've been there by myself. But even just the difference between his personality and the newer associate's personality, I mean, they couldn't be more night and day different. And, I joke about, like, when the main associate is there, I'm like, well, I don't get anything else done because we are jib-jabbing all day long about, I even go back and think, like, what are we talking about? I don't know. But we will find things to talk about and laugh about. And it is probably 40% us picking on each other and just talking about how ridiculous the other one is. And then another, 30% is mocking the staff and the other 30% is mocking the patients or like other people we know, other colleagues or a product or something. I mean, there's something to laugh about, like when you are super stressed with a patient that's about to come in and to be able to even say, man, this is really stressing me out. This mom is coming in. This is what she said last time, but this is where we are here. What would you do? I don't know, man. Glad it's not my patient. Just even something that little. And so then we start laughing about that. Or how can I sabotage it into you being the one who sees the patient? And, so it's just always just something fun to laugh about. Or then it is like, okay, well, what's your strategy on handling this? Okay, well, maybe we should do this. Or would you take an x-ray? Or would you, mom's wanting a filling here. I suggested a crown. Am I crazy? Like, could we try that here? No, you're not crazy. Or yeah, I would. So it's just somebody to bounce ideas off of. But honestly, like, it's far more fun. It's a far more fun day for me.
Yeah.
And I can't put a price tag to that. Like, I would rather make a little bit less just to make sure I'm enjoying my day more. Like, that is absolutely worth it to me.
Absolutely. Well, and not to mention the coverage aspect of it. I have so many practice owners. The bulk of mine are just singular practice owners without associates. And I had one this week that he and his wife were sick. He ended up having to be out of the practice a good bit throughout the week. And practice is scrambling, rescheduling patients. There were emergency patients that they didn't know what to do with that needed to be seen. And so I was actually on the phone with his, front office person, and she was saying, what do we do going forward? What do we do in situations like this when he has to be out, or what if he wants to take a vacation? How do we take care of our patients? And so there are alternatives, right? So you can strike a partnership with somebody in the area that's willing to serve as your backup and you're willing to serve as their backup. But it's certainly not ideal when you're having to send them to another office in town. What's more ideal is for them to be able to be taken care of in your office. And if you've got an associate that's familiar with the practice, is integrated in, you have built-in backup that you really don't have to worry about. So even from that aspect alone, it's worth taking a little bit of a pay cut so that you can take a 1-week vacation and not necessarily worry about who's going to see your patients if something comes up.
Well, and then think about the loss of going, okay, well, yeah, I took a little bit of a pay cut, but the practice took a major hit having to be closed that day. Mm-hmm. and then the guilt associated with that, and then you're scrambling and trying to get your staff to come work on a Saturday or Sunday to make up for it. And in this market, you have somebody come on a Sunday, they're leaving your practice
next day.
Yeah, they're gone. So, there's multiple advantages to having an associate now more than ever. I mean, I also think about somebody who loves to ride bikes, and you fell and you twisted your ankle. Well, if you have an associate there that can help you, like, how do you, or the other day, my kids' field trip.
Yes.
I'm not going to get this back. There were 2 years where we didn't get to go on field trips, and now we want to go, and she's been begging me to go.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to say no? My patients are more important. So I was like, come hell or high water, I'm going to that field trip. And so, because my associate had to be gone for paternity leave, the schedule was full. Luckily, my buddy that helped me on when I was on maternity leave years ago, she was able to step in. But I was like, if she can't, I will cancel the day, which is, again, super expensive in that the patients would have had to be rescheduled, but then the staff needs that money now more than ever with inflation and all of that. So I'm supposed to just cancel everybody that day. Really, ultimately, it would have been me having to tell my kid I'm sorry, or my husband having to take a day off work. But she didn't want him to go. She wanted me to go.
Right.
And then to look back on that, a year later or 5 years later, and who knows, probably 5 years later, my kid would never remember, but I would. So it's just, I don't know. I really can't see a huge downside to an associate.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, especially in your case, it hasn't been this. It doesn't have to be full-time. It can be a 1 day a week associate, a 2 day a week associate. You can build up. So, we talk about the financial aspect and the hit that the owner can take. It could be a very minimal hit if it's 1 day a week. And I would recommend the strategy that you've used, which is initially when that associate comes on board. In my mind, it is ideal that the practice owner and the associate are working side by side for a while. Even if the space of the office is limited. So let's say that an office only has 4 or 5 ops and they have a couple hygienists. So, oh man, that only leaves each doctor with one, operatory. That is not ideal, but it is more ideal for them to each have one operatory, share the space for a period of time. That could be a month, that could be a couple months, until they've worked alongside each other enough that either practice owner then drops off that day and he or she is just maybe working a 4-day week instead of a 5-day week, or a 3-day week instead of a 4-day week. Or it could be that if it's a 4-day per week practice, that then the associate is moved potentially to a different day, and now the office is open 5 days instead of 4 days. But either way, initially, I think it needs to be set up to where the practice owner and associate work together.
And maybe, you tell me if this is helpful or not, but maybe if the associate's there every Tuesday, then maybe the associate does initially for the first month, does all the hygiene checks while the main doc, and then if you're not in a hygiene check, you're kind of watching what the main doc is doing. Or maybe twice, 2 weeks in a row, and then you switch, and then you let the associate manage the treatment, and then you are watching hygiene. But that way, that lets you see kind of both sides, like how are they treatment planning, and then what is that treatment looking like. And I would assume in a general practice, like kind of knowing like what is the protocol for even something as simple as like, okay, we've determined the patient needs an antibiotic. Well, in your practice, how do you get that to the patient? Are you writing a script? Are you faxing it in? What is your software like? How are we, or what is your, I don't know, just all of those little protocol. Like, here's one that we discovered, and it wasn't with an associate, although it's just a matter of time where I was like, oh gosh, if these people don't know it, then the associate really doesn't know it. When we refer. And so we had a new assistant not too long ago, and we said, the orthodontist referral. Well, the rest of us know that it's really these 2 orthodontists that we send to that are in our area. But we happen to have like 6 orthodontist cards because people from all over will come by, drop off goodies, but our patients don't live in those areas. So we never really refer them. They're all good orthodontists, I'm sure, but we just don't, because our patients like literally come from a mile or 2 around our practice. And so I walked by and I'm like, what is she doing? Because I see the new assistant digging through. I'm like, what is that? And she'd pulled like 6 different cards.
Oh, wow.
And luckily I caught her. I'm like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? And so like, I mean, there was all these orthodontists that every now and then we've got a random patient that lived around us and now they moved and they still want to come to us. And so I'm like, I don't know why this patient drives all the way out here either, but they're certainly not going to come out here for the orthodontist. They're just coming out here because we were their established practice to begin with. But they want to see an orthodontist out there. That's why we have that card. But there was no way this associate was going to know that. So anyway, I'm like, or this assistant would have known that. And I'm like, I bet you associate doesn't know that.
That's right.
What are our protocols? Even after, I don't know if anybody listened to our podcast previously, recently, it was about know thy practice and know where stuff is. Our associate's been in our practice for a year now. And I'm like, shame on you, shame on us, but really shame on you, man. I taught you better than that, because I remember teaching this when you were a dental student years ago, was when you start, you need to figure out where the emergency kit is, where the this is, where the that is. And so if you listen to our podcast a while back, a couple of episodes ago, we did one about how we ended up at the office at midnight trying to splint in this tooth, and we were both like, ugh.
Yeah.
So this past Wednesday, I was like, we start at 11, and he usually rolls in like 10:59. And I was like, how about you roll in at 10:30 and then I'll walk you through the office, because I don't even think you know how to turn the compressors on in the practice. And so, because he's only there 1 day a week. Mm-hmm. So fair enough. But we've been talking about adding on more days. But what if he's the one on call? That's the other benefit, by the way.
Yes.
Is to get people to help cover you when you're out of town.
It is huge. It's huge. And I think even just your description there, that is why the working together for a while is so critical, because they will hopefully come to know where everything's located. They are oriented in the practice, but they're also oriented with the patients, which I think is really important to have kind of that united front and to have a really good rollout to the patients of who this associate is, because this associate initially will definitely share patients with the practice owner. Now, eventually we may have enough new patients to fill that associate's schedule, but certainly in those early days, it's going to be a shared patient load, at least for a portion of the patients. And so it's important that the patients know who this person is and there's a united front that's presented, and also it gets them acclimated with the team. Who are our referral sources? How do we call in scripts? How do we answer practice related questions? Do we know about the history of the practice, et cetera, et cetera? That takes a little bit of time to get used to. I mean, even with your associate a year later, you're like, shoot, he still doesn't know. We have to be, even if it's a short 2 months that the practice owner and associate work together, we got to be intentional that they get a really good orientation during that time.
Even something as simple as, like, in our practice, we have different products for different kids. Like, we might give out Paradex for this, Parox for that. Mm-hmm. We have a Stance mouth rinse that we'll give to XYZ. We have Riemann Pro. We have MI Paste. We have Floramax. We have a Prevident prescription we could write. We've got, those little things that I know initially he was like, wait, what? He knows what each of those products are, but how do we incorporate them in our practice? So little things like that I don't even think twice about, but clearly how would he know? Right. So I think, I forgot, why are we talking about this? Just for us to work together for a period?
Work together for a period of time. And to reiterate the point that it doesn't have to be kind of this full-time associate. It can start, one day you've had a good mixture of, one that was 3 days a week, one that was 1 day, another that was 1 day. You've kind of got one PRN is what I would call, just kind of as needed. She's called in, to cover like for the field trip day. And so you've got a good blend of people to choose from. And so for a practice owner that's kind of like you were 6 years ago, taking this first step into associateship, and you ask the question, can I financially afford it? Most practices can afford an associate 1 day per week. And while we're on this financial part of it, let me just kind of break down some math that I tend to go by. Well, once again, I hate to leave you guys on a cliffhanger, but Dr. Kuba and I dive into
quite a few more branches of this discussion. So I wanted to take a pause here, and we will pick up next week with this conversation. This episode ended up focusing primarily on the emotional impact of deciding on an associate and also having an associate in the practice. So as you heard Dr. Kuba say, one of the most common reasons that a practice looks at an associate is because of an emotional need for relief or for freedom in the practice. And this is very, very common that practice owners get to a point where they feel like they need to be able to step away from the practice and worry less about it when they're away. Or it could be that life circumstances have changed and they simply need to work less. So it could be that somebody was working 5 days a week and they, family life changed and they need to be involved more at home and they jump back to 3 or 4 days a week. Or it could be a physical ailment of some sort that begins to take place, and therefore it's impossible to continue to practice 4 days a week in a row. And then maybe that changes to practicing 2 days and then off a day and one more day. There's a variety of reasons where a solo practitioner might need assistance in the way of an associate. The other reason can simply be because the practice becomes too much for one doctor to handle. So in a general practice, one of the litmus test things that you can do is when you are moving from 2 hygienists a day to adding even a 1 day a week, 3 day of hygienist a day, that can become very difficult for a single practitioner to manage on her own or his own. So when your hygiene department has grown to a point where you're having to jump up so often to do hygiene exams, it becomes harder to get treatment done. That is often a good time to look at bringing on an associate. And again, that can be done in a stair-step approach where maybe it's just your 1 day a week that you have 3 hygienists. That's also your 1 day a week that you have an associate. It could be that your treatment is getting booked out very far. So far in the dental world is normally when it's about 6 weeks out. You don't have any capacity within 6 weeks to get treatment in. That can become troublesome for your patients to be able to get their work done in a timely manner. So that's another capacity that you can look for. It could also mean that even if you have appointments within 6 weeks, it's not the right type of appointments, and therefore you're booking out on those as well. Or you're having to run the schedule much busier than you would prefer because of that capacity issue. So that is often a popular time for a solo practitioner to look at bringing on an associate. The final reason that is somewhat emotional and somewhat just goal-driven would be the practice owner that really desires to grow the practice, but is unwilling to run a really hectic practice up until getting an associate. So it's almost the mindset of if you build it, they will come. And so you build out capacity by adding in an associate, knowing that all of the right gears are churning to fill that associate schedule within this next 6 months to a year. So it can be growth minded or goal minded as well. But as you heard Dr. Kuba talk about in this episode, there are a lot of emotional benefits and just the feeling of having somebody on your team that is like-minded, that sees things the way that you see. There's a lot of emotional benefit that comes from that, along with the freedom that an associate can often buy you. So while this episode focused heavily on that emotional side of things, we will dive into more of the details in the second episode, where we look at the financial impact and the strategy for getting an associate onboarded in your practice. So stay tuned. I'm excited for you to join us back next week and to hear more about the subject matter. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone.
but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.